This is Have You Met? My guest today is a renowned paleontologist, anatomist, National Geographic Explorer, and TED Fellow. He's known for a discovery that National Geographic rates as one of the top 20 scientific discoveries of the last decade, finding a partial Spinosaurus aegypticus skeleton. We talk about his incredible and unbelievable hunt for the largest predator known to have ever walked the planet, if Jurassic Park is actually accurate, what it's like to carry a human skull through an airport, and if we're headed the same way as the dinosaurs. Have you met Nizar Ibrahim? So Nizar, you decided you want to be a paleontologist when you were 5, right?
Yeah, it's difficult to identify the exact moment it happened, but it was somewhere around that time when I was 4 or 5 years old, I guess.
That's amazing. How would 4 or 5-year-old Nizar have reacted if we could go back and tell him that he's going to go on to uncover one of the biggest, or the biggest, skeleton of a Spinosaurus for 100 years or more?
Well, he would be absolutely delighted. I think, to be honest, at the time, I already knew that, I would find some interesting things. I obviously, didn't know which ones, but I knew, I was certain that I would find some really interesting things. And, I just kind of knew. And so I probably wouldn't have been terribly surprised because I was just so driven, so passionate. And I was just like, this is what I'm going to do. And I am going to find cool dinosaurs and other fossils. And so my entire life was kind of, my young life was kind of preparing me for the moment where I would actually, hit the field and start digging.
Yeah. So you wouldn't have been surprised. You would have been like, yeah, damn right. I'm going to find that.
Pretty much.
That's amazing. So take me back to that kind of 4 or 5 years old. I think I read on your Wikipedia, you were reading a book about paleontology or about dinosaurs, and you decided that's what you wanted to do. Take me back to that moment.
Yeah. So it started with a book, and it was a book on dinosaurs and other extinct animals. And there was just something, irresistible about these creatures, right? I mean,
yeah.
They looked so alien, and yet, they're real animals. They did really live on planet Earth a long time ago. And I always had a soft spot for animals, and I was always interested in, their anatomy, their adaptations, their ecology. But these animals were just something else, right? I mean, these were animals that were pushing the boundaries of, biomechanics. How big can you be?
Yeah.
And they just looked like, in some ways, like the dragons of our imagination, but, they were real. So I think there was something irresistible about that combination of animals and what we call deep time, geologic time. And, I was also inspired by, museum visits. So I was that kid, dragging the parents to the museum and just staring at these towering dinosaur skeletons. And I think it's something that we all have. If you just have a tiny little bit of this sense of wonder that I think all of us are born with, you can't help but just be inspired and stand there in awe when you're standing in front of one of these dinosaur skeletons. I don't think anyone can go to a dinosaur exhibit in a museum and just be kind of, unfazed and,
Yeah.
I think, it's just, there's something very special about extinct animals, and just the idea that a lot of things happened before humans appeared on the scene. I mean, that alone is a huge thing, right? I mean, to wrap your head around as a kid and as an adult.
Yeah. Still, I completely agree. They are like magic. They're like the magic monsters. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think one of my colleagues, I think it was Bob Backer, called them nature special effects. Dinosaur
oh wow!
Nature special
I like that.
And I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah, definitely. So how did you go then from discovering this passion and loving your museum visits and your books and everything like that to then taking the next step and kind of starting to put it into action?
Well, it's a tricky one because paleontology is one of those fields that are highly multidisciplinary, right? And so there are different pathways. It's not like, you're going to study this one thing and you're going to become a paleontologist. You need to understand some geology because you're going to be looking for fossils in the rock. But you also need to understand a lot of biology because you're interested in reconstructing extinct animals. You have to understand their anatomy, their evolution. And so I ended up getting what they call a joint honors degree in England at the University of Bristol in geology and biology, kind of combining the two. But other people take a straight biology course, and others, go for a geology degree. And so there are certain things you can do as a student to kind of prepare for a career in paleontology. But then there are other things where, nothing can really prepare you for something like an expedition, for example. There's no how to run an expedition 101 course at university, right? And so that part is something that you have to figure out, and that was an interesting experience for me. I was kind of thrown into this world at a relatively young age because in my mid-20s, I had to start planning my first expedition to the Sahara.
Wow.
And
so
it was kind of a daunting,
yeah.
challenge.
Yeah, I bet. So you're in your early 20s at that point. You're just fresh out of university, or is that right? Or are you still studying?
Well, so I was already well into my PhD at that point.
Yeah.
And I had to collect data, and I had decided to collect data in one of the least explored parts of the world in Africa, in the Sahara Desert. And so I had to figure out how to bring a group of people to the Sahara and, find fossils and collect geological data and so on, and bring everything and everyone back in one piece.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, that was a massive challenge then, I guess. How many people are on the average expedition or on that expedition?
It depends. I've led some really big expeditions where we're out there with 4 or 5 cars, so that's pretty big. But then sometimes, especially when I had to do everything on a shoestring budget, we kind of still do things on a shoestring budget, I should say. But in the early years, it was really challenging when you're still a PhD student, not a lot of funding. And so on one of our expeditions, there was just one car. I was just there with a couple of colleagues from Morocco. And that was interesting because if you're just there with one car, if that car breaks down in the middle of the desert, it's kind of bad news, right? So
yeah.
So it depends. It also depends what the goals are we have for our expedition and our field work.
Yeah. And so that first one that you did, was that a bit like, what were your goals there? Was it an important expedition, or like looking back?
It was. I mean, I guess early expeditions are always kind of reconnaissance trips, right? Where you just try to identify promising outcrops and areas. And then you kind of go back with a clearer idea in your mind of what exactly you can achieve and what you can collect. Yeah. And so over the first 3 expeditions I led, we collected thousands of fossil specimens. Wow. Including on my 3rd expedition, the largest dinosaur bone ever found in this part of the Sahara, as well as remains of giant flying reptiles, big fish. So it was a really great feeling. Yeah. Because when I first started, considering the idea of collecting fossils in this part of the world, some people told me that it was a bad idea and that we probably wouldn't find much, that we would come back empty-handed, more or less. And so it was a really great feeling, coming back with a car filled with fossils all the way to the top. Yeah. That's amazing. A real successful trip then. What dinosaur did that biggest bone belong to? It was a large plant-eating dinosaur. One of these long-necked dinosaurs, big, massive body. This one would have been very large. It probably would have weighed something like 50 or 60 tons. So that's like the the weight of an entire herd of elephants, just to kind of put that
That's
in
crazy.
context. It's a really massive animal. So it's a very special moment to unearth any sort of fossil, because it's always a magical moment, right? But obviously, when you're unearthing something like this, it's wild.
Next level.
And it was challenging. We found that thing essentially on a mountain, so we had to carry a massive bone down a mountain to our field vehicles. So we had to build a wooden stretcher to kind of carry it, like the four of us, the four people carrying that thing, and it was crazy. But we did it.
So nobody slipped on the way down?
Not quite, almost.
Yeah. How much did the bone weigh?
That's a good question. I can't remember. We had a rough idea of how much it weighed. We weighed it much later when it was back in the lab. But as I said, you needed 4 people to lift it up and move it very slowly. So it was a massive bone, and it was one of those moments where I realized how logistically challenging it would be to continue working in the Sahara. Because if you go to, I don't know, Wyoming or Montana or something, you sometimes see people taking bones out of the field with a helicopter or something, right? I mean, there's a whole other level of infrastructure and logistical help you get if you're working in other parts of the world. But in the Sahara, you have to figure it all out by yourself, and there's no help, no helicopters, very few roads. So it's a lot more challenging than digging up a T-Rex.
Yeah, it sounds like a completely different ball game. Completely. Yeah. So which that's your third expedition. So how many expeditions have you done up till now?
Oh, I don't know if I kept track.
Really, that many? Wow.
Yeah, we did quite a few, and some of them were shorter than others. I did some field work in other parts of the world also, including in Europe. So it's but obviously the African ones are very special, because those are the ones where we made all the really landmark discoveries. Those are the discoveries that really kind of defined our careers. And I have a great team. I've worked with them for many years, and it's that's always a special experience when we get to work in the Sahara and get together.
You feel like you're kind of discovering new territories and new things, and you're really on the cutting edge out there.
Well, in many ways, Africa is, I have sometimes described it as paleontology's forgotten continent.
Yeah.
Much of what we know about the age of dinosaurs is really, based on quote unquote Western discoveries and Western narratives. It's discoveries from places like North America and Europe.
Yeah.
And other parts of the world are kind of catching up, so to speak. Places like China, for example, or Argentina, which are producing a lot of dinosaur discoveries now. But it's still a biased perspective. And then you look at Africa, and that's our planet's second largest landmass. And Africa is just, way behind. And there are areas the size of entire countries that are entirely unexplored, right? So it's, it's a real treasure trove, but it's hard work. And, there's some real logistical challenges. I mean, that's one of the reasons why it is underexplored, right? It's pretty complicated sometimes.
Yeah. So let's do it. Let's talk about the big one. I want to just sit back and hear you tell me the whole story, because it sounds like it was just a crazy experience finding Spinosaurus, right? Because this is a dinosaur. So you're going to jump in here in a minute and tell me where I'm wrong and tell me everything I've missed. But it was discovered like over 100 years ago by Ernst Stromer. Is that right?
Yes. Well, he described and named it. It was actually found by his fossil collector.
Oh, wow.
Was out there in Egypt, and but Stromer is strongly associated with this dinosaur, obviously, because he named it, described it, put it on display.
Yeah. Okay. So that was in what, like 1915 or something around there?
Yes.
I think.
Yeah. That's
okay. Yeah. And then that was lost in the Second World War, the skeleton of that. And then there's you a couple of years ago Go on, tell me the story. I can't.
Well, so Spinosaurus is kind of like the holy grail of
Yeah.
dinosaur paleontology.
Yeah.
We just had this short glimpse of this amazing animal, and it was just a few bones, not a near complete skeleton or anything like that, but just enough to show that this was a strange dinosaur with a giant sailback, or I should say, a giant sail on its back, and strange crocodile-like jaws, and it was a real giant. That's pretty much all we knew. And so the few remains we had were destroyed in World War II. And so this became, kind of the ultimate prize for anyone working in Africa, right? Finding a new Spinosaurus skeleton. So I was in one of those places in Africa where you can, find a Spinosaurus, at least in theory. And we're finding, bits and pieces of Spinosaurus, isolated teeth, little bone fragments. But that was pretty much it, right? That's what you find most of the time in this part of the world.
Okay.
But on one of our expeditions in 2008, so this was one of the early ones, we were just returning from fieldwork in the Sahara, and we stopped in a small oasis town on the edge of the desert. And we came across this local man who showed us a cardboard box filled with fossils. And the fossils looked very strange. They all belong together. They were associated. For the most part, they're still encased in sediment, and there was sand and rock and so on. And you could see some bits sticking out here and there. And I looked at these things and I thought, that's unusual to actually find bones that all belong to the same skeleton. But the bones themselves also looked really strange. And there was one piece of bone that was sticking out, and it was a blade-shaped piece of bone. And it was very dense. You could tell by looking at the cross-section. It was very dense bone. And there was a really strange reddish purple line running through the middle. And I'd never seen anything like this before. So I thought, this could be something interesting. Maybe this is a chunk of a rib of a very big plant-eating dinosaur, but maybe, just maybe, this is actually a piece of a Spinosaurus spine, right? Nobody really knew what Spinosaurus spines looked like, certainly not from the inside.
Yeah.
And so I made sure that these fossils were brought to the paleontology research collection at the University of Casablanca in Morocco. And I thought, maybe one day I'll be able to figure out what this is. And at around the same time, I was also visiting museum collections all around the world to look at fossils of African dinosaurs. I was writing my PhD thesis at the time. And so I was visiting museums, in North America and Europe. And one of the places I visited was the Natural History Museum in Milan, Italy. Mm-hmm. And my Italian colleagues had something very special they wanted to show me. They said that they have a partial skeleton of a dinosaur sitting in their collections. And they told me that this skeleton had been taken out of North Africa, probably Morocco. And they told me that this skeleton probably belongs to Spinosaurus, the lost giant of the Sahara, basically.
Yeah.
So I was very excited, and they took me to the collections room, and we looked at the bones, and I was just blown away because there were leg bones and foot bones and ribs, skull bones, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is, maybe after all these years we have a new skeleton of Spinosaurus. There are quite a few bits missing, but just looking at the big, tall spines, I knew that this was almost certainly Spinosaurus. But it was exciting, but we also knew that we had a really big challenge, because we didn't know where exactly these fossils were found. And if you're missing this sort of contextual information, your specimen is, I don't want to say worthless, but it really, loses a lot of its scientific value, because you don't really know what the dig site looked like. Was this a dig site with bones of many different sorts of animals, or was it just this one skeleton? Is this a dig site? What does the dig site tell you about the environment the animal lived in? What does it tell you about the age of the fossils, and so on and so on? And of course, we had another problem, and that was that, we were keen to return these fossils to whatever country they had come from. But it's very difficult to prove that, if you don't know anything about the origin of the specimen. And so that was a big problem. And I just felt like, we got so close, but, we hadn't quite gotten to a point where we could really say, here's a new skeleton of Spinosaurus. And but then I picked up one of the spines. There was a chunk of spine, and I looked at the spine in cross section. So I looked at the inside structure, and I saw this very dense bone with a reddish purple line running through the middle. And whenever I look at a fossil, I have this mental, this database of fossils that I'm going through. And I try to think, have I seen anything like this before? And I just remembered this strange bone I had seen in the cardboard box in Morocco. And I thought, these bones look so similar in shape, size, texture, color, everything. And the cross section has the same basic pattern. And I thought, and of course I knew that associated skeletons are very rare in this part of the world. And so I thought, maybe these bones here in Italy and the bones I saw in Morocco actually belong to the same skeleton. And I thought maybe what happened is that the local man found a few bones, and those are the bones I saw and brought to the university in Casablanca in Morocco. And then later he found more bones of the same skeleton, and those somehow ended up in Italy. We knew that they had been acquired by an Italian geologist who eventually decided to donate these bones to science, and that's how they ended up in this museum in Milan. Right. And so I thought, if those two sets of bone belong to the same skeleton, and that's a big if, then maybe I can actually figure out where the dig site is located. And in my mind, it sounded pretty straightforward. I thought, well, all I have to do is just find the guy with the cardboard box who had shown us the bones. And I thought, if I find this guy, then I can confirm whether these two sets of bones belong to the same animal, and we can actually find the dig site.
So how long is that after you first saw the bone in the box?
It was a few months later.
Okay.
But the problem was actually going back and looking for this man. That took much longer, because it dawned on me that this was a crazy idea. And it actually took years before I tried to locate the man, because it's, in Morocco, there's a big trade in fossils. There are many, many people in remote parts of the country digging for fossils for a living. By some estimates, 50,000 or more people there depend on the fossil trade. And so to find this one person was just, the odds were just stacked against us on an astronomical scale. Right?
Yeah.
And so, but at some point I just felt like I had to do it. It was kind of like, what, if I just keep waiting and contemplating the odds, it's not going to happen, right? It's like with the lottery ticket, the odds are really stacked against you, but if you don't buy the ticket, you're definitely not going to win, right? And so I thought, I have to at least try. If I try and it doesn't work, then at least I know that I tried everything, So I traveled back to Morocco, and I met up with a couple of colleagues, and they felt like it was a crazy idea, a wild goose chase. It was the kind of thing that, a rational, intelligent person shouldn't really be doing. And when my Moroccan colleague asked me how we would even identify the guy and find the guy, considering that I didn't know the name or phone number or address or anything, I said, well, the one thing I remember about the man was that he had a mustache. That was the one thing I remembered. And that just didn't sound like a great starting point for this search,
Yeah.
right? But we tried, and we really tried. I mean, we traveled to some remote parts of the country where we knew people were digging for dinosaurs, but they had never heard anything about an associated skeleton. They said that was unheard of. And we just, we just couldn't find a promising trail. We were just going to all these places, and it just looked like it was not going to work out. And so on the very last day of our search, we were sitting in a cafe in an oasis town, and I remember very clearly, I just saw basically all my great plans and ideas and dreams just go down the drain. I thought, all these ideas of relocating a Spinosaurus dig site and maybe even finding more bones, not going to happen. And it's a little bit like in the movies, when you have this big dramatic moment where one of the characters is at its lowest point, and then suddenly something happens, right? You think those things only happen in the movies, but right in that moment when I was sitting there and just, this close to throwing in the towel, a person walked past our table, and just, by sheer coincidence, I happened to look in that direction, and I caught a glimpse of his face, and he did have a mustache, and I recognized his face immediately, and so did my Moroccan colleague, and we looked at each other like incredulous, kind of, did we spend too much time in the sun today, or was this actually the guy? And it was like seeing a mirage in the desert or something, right? But we thought, well, we can't possibly both be seeing the same mirage at the same time, right? So let's catch up with the guy. And we did. And he recognized us. And, we started talking, and he said, well, yes, he remembered us. He was the guy who gave us the bones in the cardboard box. And he then said he found many more bones belonging to the same skeleton. And he said he sold these to an Italian. And I just couldn't believe it, right? It was all of a sudden, everything kind of fell into place.
Yeah.
And the next thing I had to do, of course, was to convince the man to take us to the dig site. As far as he was concerned, he was done with the dig site. He had sold some of the bones. But I told him that for me, it's very important to collect this contextual data I mentioned earlier on. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't know, I might still find something. And I also said that I would like to return all these fossils to their country of origin. And so we just had this discussion. And at some point, he just kind of looked into the distance, and he said, okay, I'll show you. And he did. And so that's how we identified the Spinosaurus dig site. And I cannot emphasize enough just how special this place is, because you have to remember, this is the only Spinosaurus skeleton in the world. And, I got to the dig site, and I picked up some little bone fragments. And I could tell just from the texture and color, that's our skeleton. But it was very hard to tell if there was more to find there. So I decided to come back, and I did. I put together an international team, and we've been going back a number of times to collect more bones. Probably the most exciting and most important chapter in that story was in 2018 and 2019, when we decided to remove about 20 tons of rock of overburden at the site to really go much deeper into this steep escarpment. And we ended up finding the back half of Spinosaurus, basically, which was the big part of the skeleton that was missing. And so this has been an incredibly productive site. It's a really special place. And every single fossil we've been collecting there is so important, because, as I said, this sounds crazy what I'm going to say now, but if 2 or 3 T-Rex skeletons in the world just explode and crumble to pieces, it wouldn't be the end of the world for paleontology, because we still have many other T-Rex skeletons, right?
Yeah.
But with this skeleton, that every bone you're picking up in many cases is the only one of its kind in the world. And in some cases where we might have, isolated bits and pieces we collected before, again, the ones we're collecting there are extra special because they all belong to this one skeleton. But as if that was not enough, this dinosaur also turned out to be the strangest, weirdest dinosaur out there. And when we pieced it together, we realized, especially in 2019, that this dinosaur would rewrite the textbooks.
It's amazing. That is epic. Like, what a story, man. I can't believe it. At every single point in that story, the odds are just against you. Even at the moment where you recognize the guy, and even, like, how did you feel at that moment? When he said, when you realize, it is actually him. What was going through your brain?
Well, it was surreal. And I was already kind of starting to plan the next steps, right? How do I convince him to take us there? And what next? Are we going to find anything there? But it still felt a little surreal. You still had this feeling, how you sometimes feel that you're going to wake up and you're going to go like, oh man, that was a nice, dream. It still had this surreal nature to it. But the thing is, the odds were stacked against us. And you could say, well, that was a really lucky moment, right? But you have to put in a lot of work to make these lucky moments happen. You know what I mean? So if I had not traveled back there, we would never have found the guy, right? So of course it was an incredible coincidence that, and again, just like for added drama in the movies, on the last day, we bump into this guy. But the only reason all of these things happen is because I just thought, you know what, I have to try. I'm actually going to book a ticket and fly out there. And, and so I think sometimes, what's holding people back is that they think a little bit too much about how the odds are stacked against them, right? Instead of just saying like, well, you know what, I'll try my best. And, and I'm not encouraging people to gamble or play the lottery here. But sometimes you do have to, take this leap and just, convince yourself that you can actually still make it happen, even if the odds are stacked against you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's even crazy to think that the guy remembered the dig site, like where exactly it was, because he's probably been to loads of different places digging all across the place.
Well, that doesn't surprise me too much because,
associated skeleton, I suppose.
Yes. I mean, he's seen many fossils, but he had never seen anything like this before. And this is the most complete skeleton ever found in this big region of the Sahara. By far. In fact, it is now the most complete Cretaceous predatory dinosaur from mainland Africa. So it really is a very special find. But as I said, little did we know at the time when we first, visited the dig site, that the most exciting parts of the skeleton were actually still hidden in the rock.
Yeah. And I suppose he didn't know that either, otherwise he would have carried on.
Well, no, but it's very hard work. It took him many weeks to get the bones out. He did end up getting out. And there was another one of those moments when I decided to do what I just said, remove 20 tons of rock to see if we could possibly find something else. After we found the bones, one of my colleagues in the UK told me, in all honesty, he said, you know what, I mean, I thought it was a waste of time and effort to go in there. I really didn't think that you would actually find anything. So there was another one of these moments where you kind of look at this thing and you go like, man, this is going to be a lot of effort, a lot of, you have to raise the funds to go to the place, then organize. We had to organize a jackhammer, which kept falling apart every 5 minutes. We had to work under grueling conditions. At some point in 2019, we were there in July. So it was, 120 Fahrenheit. And it was just, but then the rewards were just off the scale, right? So it was another one of these moments where, I could have said, okay, you know what? We've got quite a few bones. Really cool. Let's go and move on to another site. but good thing that we decided to stay and go deeper into
Definitely.
the dig site.
Yeah, amazing. Tell me more about the dinosaur itself, Spinosaurus, because I'm assuming you're obviously very passionate about this guy. You've always been passionate about the Spinosaurus.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing about Spinosaurus is it's one of these really charismatic dinosaurs now, but for a very long time we knew next to nothing about this animal. As you may know, it had I think it only really was on people's radar after in the early 2000s when Jurassic Park 3 featured it as the dinosaur that the main antagonist,
the new king,
snapped a T-Rex neck, and people were like, what? There's a dinosaur that can do that. And but even then we knew next to nothing about this dinosaur, because when you look at the Jurassic Park Spinosaurus, it's every single part of the body is wrong, completely wrong, right? The legs are too long, the tail is wrong, the sail is too small in proportion to the body, the arms are wrong, the skull is wrong. But they basically, at the time, there was a kind of a best guess of what this animal may have looked like. Because as I said earlier, we kind of knew it had a sail, and we knew it had long, slender jaws. And so that's what they did. They kind of tried to come up with a dinosaur with those features, and the rest was just kind of made up, right?
Yeah.
So when we unveiled the real Spinosaurus, it really, made a big splash. In every possible way.
Nice pun.
I know. I worked hard on that one. Because it's a dinosaur that really expands the ecological space that dinosaurs occupy. When we started working on this thing, we already had an inkling that this thing was eating fish. Because it has these long, narrow jaws. If you have narrow jaws, you can close them rapidly underwater. Conical teeth, the nose openings are pushed back on the skull. This is something we don't see in any other dinosaur to that extent. But then we found other clues. The hind limbs were reduced in size. And this is something, as a paleontologist, that you kind of know from things like whale ancestors. If you look at the evolutionary history of whales, you see that they evolved from legged ancestors, long-legged ancestors, and then over time you can see the legs getting shorter and shorter and shorter until they all but disappear. And now you just have some vestigial remnants in modern whales of hip parts and so on. So we thought maybe this is what's happening with this dinosaur. It's really spending a lot of time in the water. And then we looked at the foot, which is unusually wide with flattened claws, and we thought, wow, this also looks really strange, almost like, it was a webbed foot or something. But then one of the big moments came when we decided to look at the inside structure of the bone. And one of my Italian colleagues, Matteo Fabri, who's now at Yale University, determined that the bones were unusually dense. If you look at the thigh bone, the femur, for example, typically you have a large opening in the middle, which we call the medullary cavity. In this dinosaur, it was basically all dense bone. And we thought, that's strange. And it turns out that this is something we see in animals like manatees, animals that spend a lot of time in the water. This dense bone is important in buoyancy control in the water. And that's when we were just like, oh gosh, this is really huge. And so we published the first big paper in Science in 2014. And it was on the, Spinosaurus was on the cover of National Geographic, and it was, all over the news. And it caused a lot of lively discussions, to put it mildly, because people were just like, and I think at the time I kind of underestimated just how much of a discussion and how many debates this would trigger, just because our data was always very sound. Our science was good. But what I didn't fully appreciate at the time was just how much of a challenge this was to our prevailing dogma, of one of the prevailing dogmas of the dinosaurs, and that which basically states that dinosaurs are land animals. This is something you can read in every children's book. Those things you see with the plesiosaurs and mosasaurs and so on, those are marine reptiles, but dinosaurs are firmly grounded on land. That's what dinosaurs do.
Yeah.
And so obviously there were some people kind of going like, oh no, there must be some other explanation. And we have to, one of the few things that I thought was a legitimate question at the time was that we didn't really know how exactly this thing would move through the water. In other words, we didn't really have a motor that would move this thing through the water. We're trying to go like, was it paddling with its feet? Was it doing something different? And that's when the 2018, 2019 expeditions came in, where we found the tail and basically the back half of the animal. And when we dug out the tail bones, it was just probably the most exciting moment of the Spinosaurus project, because we realized that the tail bones were absolutely unique. We had never seen anything like this in any other dinosaur. Extremely long spines on all of these tail bones. And the anatomy basically turned this dinosaur's tail into a giant tail fin or paddle-like structure. And it was just, it suddenly all made sense, right? All of a sudden, we looked at all of these strange adaptations. It was like, yeah, this is not just a dinosaur that was kind of, standing in the shallows and trying to catch fish like a grizzly bear or something. This was an animal that was actively, moving through the water. It was a better swimmer than any other dinosaur, and it was catching prey in an aquatic environment. So for all those reasons, I told you early on, it's the biggest predatory dinosaur, the longest for sure. It's very heavy also. It's the most complete skeleton of a predatory dinosaur from the Cretaceous of mainland Africa. And each one of those things on its own would be a huge deal, right? But then to also be able to say that this is the first, predominantly aquatic dinosaur, that was just amazing. And so, and this dinosaur continues to surprise us. But every single thing we find just turns it into an even more aquatic creature. And I can tell you, and this is, I can't tell you too much about this, but we still have a few more papers in the pipeline. And, this is not the last word on Spinosaurus, but it's a dinosaur that just keeps on giving, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds it. So do you think it spent more of its time in the water than on land? Like, was it predominantly aquatic?
Well, the thing is, we can never put an actual percentage on it. We can't say, well, Spinosaurus spent 68% of its time in the water. That's just impossible. But here's one way to look at it. The skull of Spinosaurus has water loving written all over it, as does, if you look at the tail, same thing. If you look at the inside structure of the bones, same thing. So there's clearly, it's more than just a subtle hint, right?
It's a common theme.
But also, you have to remember, animals spend quite a lot of time searching for food, right? And eating.
Yeah. If
you're as big as a Spinosaurus, and these animals grew to about 15 meters, 50 feet in length, and would have weighed maybe somewhere up to 9 or 10 tons, then you need a lot of food. And if all your anatomy and all your anatomical or evolutionary weaponry, so to speak, is to catch things in the water, you're going to spend a lot of time there, right? Because you need to feed. Of course, we know that Spinosaurids, this group that includes Spinosaurus, could also eat other things, right? We have some evidence. We have a pterosaur, a flying reptile, a neck bone with a Spinosaur tooth embedded in it. That's a different kind of Spinosaur from Brazil. Wow. There is some evidence that suggests that one of the Spinosaurus from the UK actually also had some small dinosaur remains in its rib cage, as well as fish remains. And that, I think, is just because if you're 50 feet in length, you can eat pretty much anything you want, right? You can go and, but the anatomical features all tell us that the main food source for these animals would have been fish. And if you want to catch fish, you're not going to do it in the forest. You're not going to do it on the riverbanks, because even just standing in the shallows and walking around for a 10-ton animal, which by the way would also be very heavy, so just standing on muddy ground is probably not a good idea. Where you really have to be out in the open water and out in deeper water and search for prey. So I think what we can say is that it spent the majority of its time in the water. The exact percentage we'll never know.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Are there still people in your industry that disagree with it being like an aquatic dinosaur, or is it now just generally accepted?
I think science obviously always, has this auto-correction mechanism. And so when you put a new idea out there, you expect people to test it, attack it, and if it survives, then it will become a well-established idea in your field. So there hasn't. I mean, many of my colleagues really like the work on Spinosaurus, and colleagues in very eminent colleagues in the US and Europe and so on. There's been a small number of people trying to come up with alternative explanations or scenarios, or saying, well, okay, so it was a really good swimmer, but we still think that it would stand in the shallows and try to catch fish there rather than actively pursuing prey in the water and what have you. But by and large, I think every time we publish a new paper, it becomes more and more difficult to find any kind of weaknesses in the line of reasoning. And as I said, we have a number of additional papers coming out now. So I would say the main reason why there has been some opposition, and mostly I think that was before the 2020 paper, is just because we're challenging this very old dogma, right?
Yeah.
And so that was, that was probably a normal reaction to a certain extent. And then, of course, if you publish something in high-profile journals like Science or Nature, there will always be, some interest in surfing that wave, so to speak. If you have a big, charismatic dinosaur and there's a story all over the news, if you write anything related to that dinosaur, it's probably also going to get a lot of press coverage. But with, I think, one exception, papers that were kind of questioning some of our interpretations did not really present any new data, new discoveries, new anatomy, or new quantitative analyses or something. It was more like, a review of the literature and coming up with some possible alternative scenarios, but it wasn't really like adding anything new to the discussion, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, more or less.
For the sake of it.
But as I said, I mean, we of course, you have to remember that we already have like a bunch of other papers in the pipeline now, and I know what direction this is going in. So it's as I said, if anything, this thing keeps getting more and more aquatic, and it's really remarkable. And to be honest, it shouldn't be that surprising. Dinosaurs, ruled our planet for an incredibly long time, right? Almost the entirety of the quote unquote age of dinosaurs, right? Or age of reptiles, whatever you want to call it, the Mesozoic. And they were incredibly successful and dominant. And as you know, our own little furry ancestors, little mammals, literally lived in the shadows of the dinosaurs, right? So, and they really had to wait for their lucky break to kind of, take over. And so it was always surprising to think that dinosaurs completely dominated terrestrial environments, so land, ecosystems, and also took off to the skies, because we now know that, dinosaurs gave rise to birds. But somehow the one thing they never managed to do is invade the aquatic world. That always seemed really odd to me anyway. Yeah. And so in some ways, I think we shouldn't be surprised if you consider just for how long dinosaurs were dominant on our planet. We shouldn't really be surprised that at least some of them also invaded the aquatic world.
Yeah. So do you think there were probably others as well that are yet to be discovered? Or
Um,
yet to be pieced together that they were in fact aquatic?
Again, I don't want to give too much away, but yes.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Going to keep an eye on these papers that you said are coming up. So he walked on four legs as well. Is that right? That's what you
Well,
believe?
the biomechanics of Spinosaurus is a little complicated. And now that we found the tail, that also changes things a little bit. If you try to calculate the center of mass, um, it's without a doubt a very front heavy animal.
Yeah.
And it would have been, you know, far more at home in the water for many reasons. On land, some at least temporary forelimb support is one possibility. But you also have to, if you look at living animals, there are some animals that look extremely front heavy, and they still manage to just about walk on their hind limbs. So it's not entirely inconceivable that Spinosaurus could maybe do that. But I think the most likely model now is still that it could at times use forelimb support, but not necessarily the entire time. This is something we still, and the one part of the skeleton that we do not have many bones for are the forelimbs, which is a little frustrating. But we are currently trying to build a highly sophisticated Spinosaurus to answer questions of not just aquatic locomotion, but also terrestrial locomotion and so on, to answer these questions in depth. But based on everything we know now, it was certainly a very front-heavy animal.
Yeah. Amazing. Take me back to, I want to know in general this process, but let's look at Spinosaurus as the example. So when you found the first lot of bones, what is that process after that?
Well, one of the first things we do is we prepare the bones, so they're cleaned and sediment and so on is removed. We then describe the bones anatomically, so we take all sorts of measurements and we make comparisons with other dinosaurs and so on, and living animals. When you try to understand something like the sail of Spinosaurus, for example, we ended up looking at a crested chameleon, to understand sails. If you want to look at webbing, webbed feet, you might look at alligators or wading birds and so on. So you do a lot of comparative anatomy, essentially. And then you can also use cutting edge technology to understand your dinosaur. So we CT scanned bones of Spinosaurus to look at the inside structure of the bones, but also to create digital models of every single bone, or most of the bones, I should say, which is great because you can share these models with other people, or you also have a permanent record. Considering what happened with the first Spinosaurus skeleton, at least we know we have a digital record now of things. And of course, you can then also use those digital data points to build a digital dinosaur, or a digital skeleton, which you can then wrap in skin, essentially. And so you can do all sorts of things using modern technology. And then, yes, you test different hypotheses. You try to come up with the best explanation for some of these strange anatomical features, and eventually you submit your research to a scientific journal. And then you wait and see what the reaction is.
Yeah. Okay. And then it all kicks off once people.
Yeah. I mean, you have to go through the review process and what have you. But for this paper, I was really looking forward to the publication of this one, because I knew that people would go completely bananas over this paper. Yeah. One of the reviewers, I think I can reveal that one of the reviewers wrote that when they looked at the figure of the Spinosaurus tail, they were just it was something along the lines of, I was just grinning and smiling, and because it's an incredible piece of anatomy. And so when the paper was published, it was just insanity. I mean, it was one of the top trending things on Twitter, Spinosaurus. It was, where you would usually expect to see like politicians and celebrities, there was this one thing that read Spinosaurus, right? And within just the first few hours and the first couple of days, there was just countless pieces of artwork that people were sharing on, online and what have you. And it became, I think, the biggest paleontology story ever published in terms of the media impact, at least as far as can be calculated on by things like Altmetric, which kind of tracks the media impact of science stories. And so, it became one of the highest impact papers. I think it was the second highest impact paper for April 2020. The only one that had higher impact was one of the COVID papers, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So it was wild. It was just off the charts, right? It was really special, and those are the kind of discoveries that you dream of making, right? If you're so going back to your first question, if you ask 4 or 5-year-old Nizar, this would be, kind of just crazy to think that, you would not just have a really exciting discovery, but one that really redefines the way we look at predatory dinosaurs, for example. So we have lots of other really exciting discoveries, we made and papers in the pipeline, but this one is obviously always going to hold a special place in my heart.
Yeah, that's going to be your number one Hall of Fame. Yeah, for sure. Has anybody got in touch from Hollywood yet about making the film? When's that happening?
Well, we did put together a Nova National Geographic documentary film a few years ago. Now, of course, a lot has happened, and we're working on a new documentary film. And I guess at some point, some people said like, "Oh, you have to bring it to the big screen, right? This is just crazy." But again, I can't reveal too much. But just wait. There's more coming.
I'm sure there is.
It's one of those things that people ask you, like, how can you? In some ways, for a young scientist, it's an interesting experience because you're setting the bar really high, and it's like one of those things where how some people sometimes they'll be trying to chase this one moment in their career where they kind of set the bar really high. And so that was an interesting experience, but I'm happy to say that we have several other really, really high impact discoveries we're going to announce in the next couple of years. So it's for now it still reads like a dream come true kind of story for a young kid wanting to be a paleontologist.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it in the cinema. It's got to be just a matter of time, especially with that last minute finding the guy, from the box. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
Well,
if it's not already.
I kind of think that they would probably modify it, kind of say like, well, based on real events. But in this case, they can really, just stick to the facts.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't even have to make anything up.
So let's give a couple of other dinosaurs and maybe countries a little bit of credit here. So obviously Spinosaurus is your number one, but tell me about some other like highlights of expeditions and finds and dinosaurs. Yeah.
Well, we found remains of a number of different dinosaurs. I mentioned the really big plant-eating dinosaur earlier on. We found a few bones of these animals. Interestingly, in this part of the world, we find lots and lots of fossils of predators. Including some very large predators, T-Rex-sized predatory dinosaurs, giant crocodile-like hunters, giant flying reptiles, big predatory fish. So it's a very strange world, a predator's paradise, essentially. And so if you were to travel back there with a time machine, I'm afraid you wouldn't last very long, right? I think a human wouldn't survive very long. There are just so many different ways to die in this ecosystem.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting biological mystery. How could all these predators coexist in the same place? What were they feeding on? Why do we not find more remains of plant-eating animals? Part of the answer is that these predators are highly specialized. If you look at the skulls of the big predatory dinosaurs, for example, or the flying reptiles, or the crocs, they all look very different. So they were all specialized and tried to avoid direct competition, basically, in most cases anyway. Also, many of them were fish eaters. That was the one abundant food source, right? It was this incredible river system full of fish. And we're talking big fish, talking car-sized fish, right?
Wow.
And Spinosaurus. So, and again, then it's not that surprising that a dinosaur like Spinosaurus is also taking advantage of this abundant food supply, right? Even if you're a giant predatory dinosaur, if you can catch car-sized fish, that's going to keep you fed, for sure. So it's a really strange ecosystem. So it's not just about the animals we're finding, it's also about this entire lost world of African dinosaurs. That in itself is a really cool, part of our work to kind of flesh out this entire world. So it's not just about the big spectacular dinosaurs, it's also about, little snakes and, the turtles we find. And, so it's really a holistic approach we're taking, right? We're not just there to hunt for dinosaurs and kind of just ignore all the rest. We're really trying to resurrect an entire lost world. And just the scale of this river system is another part of that story that's just mind-boggling. This is a river system that stretches all across the Sahara, so which is a place that is about the size of the United States. So that gives you an idea of the scale.
Yeah.
So it's so you have individual animals that are really cool. Giant flying reptiles were uncovered. We now have hundreds of fossils of flying reptiles, crocs, dinosaurs. So lots and lots of really neat animals. We also found footprints. Footprints are also cool because that's basically fossilized behavior, right? So
it's crazy.
You get to touch this footprint and you kind of think about what happened, 100 million years ago. An animal walked right along here, and so we have this really nice spread of things. We have small fossils, big ones, dinosaurs, turtles, fish, crocs, footprints. One interesting thing I did a few years ago is I also worked on a human site. So those were bones that were just a few thousand years old, but still, that's pretty old, older than the big, Egyptian civilizations and so on. We excavated those a little further south in a country called Niger, a landlocked country in Africa. There was a different kind of experience because you're digging up members of your own species, right? And so I remember on my first evening at the site, most of the other people on the team had already been to the site. And so on my first evening, it was completely dark. I was just shining my light down on the sand, and I saw a little white thing sticking out of the sand. And I realized that this was part of human foot. And so the next day, I started excavating it. And it was the skeleton of a man in a kind of a little bit like a thinker pose, vaguely, with filed teeth. It was really the first one they had found with filed teeth. And that was a special moment because you look at this skeleton and you kind of go like, who was this man? Why did he have filed teeth? All of the skeleton finds had names we would give them, so we would differentiate them. And this one we called Halloween Man, because he was found on Halloween. Actually, it was Halloween when I excavated him, and he had this pretty scary thing with the filed teeth. And I was just looking at this skull, and that was a different kind of experience, right? Because this is a person with thoughts and feelings, just like the ones you're experiencing, and so that was also an interesting moment. And I ended up bringing some of these remains back to the United States, which is a whole other story. But that's how I ended up on one of my flights with a human skull in my backpack going through airports around the world. So that was
really? In lots of protective stuff, or just slung in the backpack?
It was an interesting experience. I traveled. I don't know if I should even reveal what European capital it was, but I traveled to one airport in Europe where they asked me, what is this? They couldn't really tell because it was actually wrapped in, and so they said, what is this big thing in your backpack? And I said, it's a human head / skull, right? And they were just like, okay, next. And I was like, okay, grabbed my backpack. I think they just didn't believe me, and maybe they just thought it was a bad joke. But then when I arrived in Detroit, that took longer. And they were just like, I mean, they were nice and everything, but I missed my connecting flight to Chicago because they first had to call up some place that deals with the, bringing in human remains into the United States. And it was late in the evening. And so that was a little more complicated. But those are some of the moments, you experience where you kind of go like, how did I end up in this situation?
Yeah.
But that's kind of part of the fun of being a paleontologist. It never gets boring, at least not in my career. And you experience all of these different things in this highly multidisciplinary field. And so you never really know what the future holds, I never thought I would be working with biorobotics experts to figure out how the tail of Spinosaurus moved. And yet that's what we did, right? I've worked with people in the field of bioinformatics to make anatomy computer readable, which was also really cool. I work with film people, exhibit people. One day you're carrying a human skull through an airport. You never really know what the future holds, and that's something that I really like.
Yeah, that's amazing. How old was that skeleton? Do you know?
That one, I think, was from a population that was about 5,000 years old.
Okay, wow.
From an episode that we know as the Green Sahara, when this little strip of the Sahara was much wetter than it is now. And you would have things like hippos and crocs and so on, as well as human remains. And incidentally, speaking of human remains, another thing that I also really appreciated, I talked to you about what it's like to find a member of your own species in the sand, right? Yeah. One thing I also got to do, and this is quite common for paleontologists, at least in the United States, is at university in Michigan, I was teaching anatomy, right, including human anatomy. And that includes things like cadaver dissection, so real human bodies, and exploring the anatomy of Homo sapiens. And of course, as a paleontologist, you have a very special view of anatomy because you have this deep time / evolutionary perspective, right? All the muscles and bones and organs and so on in your body only makes sense if you understand their evolutionary history, right? They can be traced back over many millions of years. And so that was also a very interesting experience for me because it's obviously, when you're dealing with bodies that have been donated to science, and it's a real privilege to uncover their anatomy and share that with the students. And so these are all things I don't think I could have experienced this wide range of things in any other discipline, right? I think and for that, I'm very grateful. I 4-year or 5-year-old Nizar didn't know that, but paleontology really is one of those few fields where you can still experience this very wide range of incredible things across many different disciplines. In many other disciplines, we're at a point where you're hyper specialized, and it's very difficult to branch out or do anything outside your immediate area of, so
And I think most people listening would think paleontology, like everybody knows kind of basically what it is in a nutshell. It's people digging up dinosaurs. But how would you define it? Because it seems much broader than that, and it seems like there's a lot more to it.
Well, for starters, I'll tell you that some of my colleagues, and there are quite a few of them, very rarely, or in some cases never, really do any field work. So digging up bones is clearly not the best definition, because you can be a biomechanics specialist that's kind of studying the way dinosaurs moved in a computer. You can also be a great anatomist, interested in reconstructing, dinosaur sensory systems or brains or whatever. You can be someone interested in the environments dinosaurs lived in, which means that you have more of a geology view of things. Yeah. There are many different ways to be a paleontologist, and you have to remember also that we have many fossils in museum and university collections all around the world that have never been studied. So it's a good thing that some of us are focusing on things that have already been collected, because there's a lot of information hidden in museum drawers and so on. On the other hand, as I said earlier on, some parts of our planet are severely underexplored and underrepresented in our narratives. And so you also do need some people to go out, find new things in new places, and, things like Spinosaurus, right? I mean, that has really, given us a glimpse of a dinosaur world we didn't know existed, right? And so it really takes all of these people. So really paleontology is simply the study of ancient life. And I think one thing that people also don't realize often is it has very strong links to the life sciences, to zoology, to biology. We use evolutionary biology all the time in our work. Of course, we're trying to reconstruct the evolution of dinosaurs and many other extinct groups, I should add. So there's a very strong link there. And also, paleontology is extremely relevant today, because if you ask anyone, what are the big challenges we're facing now? If you read any newspapers, or if you know that some of the big challenges we're facing are things like biodiversity loss, right? Fluctuations in climate, and what have you, deforestation, and so on. We often try to predict the consequences of our actions. What happens if you remove a certain percentage of trees and forests from the planet? What happens if our temperature changes? What happens when sea levels rise by so and so many feet? What happens if you remove top aquatic predators like sharks from an ecosystem? Are we in the middle of a mass extinction right now? What is a mass extinction? The only reason we know what a mass extinction even is because of paleontology, right? Paleontologists sat down and compared different extinction events in the fossil record to figure out what we call background extinction, which always happens, and peaks in extinction, right? Where you have some minor ones and some really big ones. Those are the mass extinctions. And so paleontology helps us understand those things, because paleontology gives us this grand epic view of planet Earth. You want to see what a planet looks like that doesn't have any ice on the poles? Okay, come into the time machine and meet, for example, the world of Spinosaurus, right? A hothouse planet, very high sea levels. You want to know what happens in a mass extinction? Again, paleontologists can tell you that. And so I think, we can try and model things in a computer, but at the end of the day, if we really want to understand how these major events are shaping life and ecosystems on our planet, we need to travel back in time. And the only discipline that can do that is paleontology, with the degree of granularity that we need. So it's become a really important tool and perspective. And I think many people don't realize that, because they might say, okay, so you're reconstructing ecosystems from 100 million years ago. Why should I care? Well, it turns out that this is of huge relevance to some of the big problems we're facing today. And of course, we should also remember that what paleontologists are doing is they're piecing together this grand, epic, incredible story. It is the greatest story out there, period. It really is the story of life on Earth, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you're interested in, what you think is, the most important thing in the world to you. It's all a part of this story, right? Of this incredible story of life on planet Earth. And it's a very special story, I mean, we've recently sent essentially a robot paleontologist to Mars, right, to find signs of life there. But there's something very special about life on our little blue planet, and there's a lot we can learn from this story. But there's also a lot of beauty and inspiration in this story. It is the greatest story out there, and so paleontologists are adding chapters and pages to this story with every discovery, and that I think is a side of paleontology that many people are not really fully appreciating.
Yeah. You talked about like the environment and the climate and extinction and these kind of things. Do you think we're headed that way? Do you think, would you describe this as the beginning of an extinction event?
Well, if you look at extinction rates, and I should add that we're only having an incomplete picture of just how bad things are, because we don't even know what's out there to begin with, if you see what I mean, right? There are many parts of our planet where we don't really understand how many plants and insects and, you name it, are actually present. And we are certainly losing a lot of, beauty for sure, but also things that are maybe of great relevance to medical research, or if you look at the world of animals and plants, there's just so many things we can learn that are of direct relevance to our own health and biology. But also we're removing key parts of food webs and ecosystems. And I mentioned sharks early on. That's a good example. Shark populations in some parts of the world and for some species have plummeted by over 95%. There's no way that this is healthy or good or even reversible. And the long-term consequences, and we know that every time we kind of try to tweak things in nature, it ends pretty badly. So we know that the long-term consequences are certainly not going to be good or positive. Of course, one thing we often forget is that at the end of the day, this mass extinction, and I think a very good case can be made that, yes, it is a mass extinction. We're in the middle of it. The extinction rates are very high. So by that definition, we certainly are in a mass extinction, is going to harm us. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. We are very, very dependent on our oceans, our forests. And I think planet Earth is going to recover just fine. Our planet has recovered from all sorts of events that, things that happen on a scale that we cannot even begin to imagine. You can think of, meteorite impacts, volcanism on a scale that we cannot even begin to imagine, and so on. Yeah. But when our planet recovers, chances are we are not going to be around anymore, right? So it's not that we have the power to completely end life on planet Earth, but we certainly have the power to damage our ecosystems so much that it becomes impossible for many, many organisms, including humans, to survive here. And when it comes to that problem, I think humans really have a big weakness there. And it's interesting, this is, we have real difficulty understanding the consequences and the scale of some of our actions, right? And we're not very good at forward thinking and planning, which is really surprising, right? I mean, we are intelligent, but we're really not very good. And that's because sometimes we don't really understand timescales in the same way that we don't really understand what 100 million years ago means, right? We're not very good at understanding statistics. And so humans are just not very well equipped to understand, some of the consequences of what they're doing. So yes, it's a fairly bleak outlook, but I think there's maybe a little glimmer of hope, and that is simply that I think some people, hopefully, fingers crossed, especially young people, are more aware of these problems and of these issues, are more prepared to do something about it. And I think we've also come to realize that we do not really dominate our planet in the way we think we are. We are quite vulnerable. And of course, the pandemic right now shows us just how vulnerable we are. You know, a tiny little virus has essentially, almost destroyed major economies and has really shown us some of our limits. And so I think we're starting to understand that we are more vulnerable. We're starting to talk about big problems, including just the sheer number of people in the world and what that means for our planet. So I think, it's a race between, or an arms race between destructive forces in human society and forces for a better balance. And that can be things like developing better, more efficient ways to use energy and resources, and humans can make huge leaps in those fields sometimes. So I don't want to be 100% pessimistic. Of course, we can consider ourselves lucky that we still live on planet Earth, you and I, at a time where we can still go and enjoy, elephants and rhinos and sharks and rainforests. But as I said, I think we have to be aware of the damage we're causing and the scale of this damage.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we're headed down a really dark road, and it's just frustrating. I think that a lot of the people that can and do have the power to change it, they're more focused on making money and things like that, which it's bad. So I mean, you think we could turn this around, but do you think we will turn this around, or do you think we're going to carry on heading down that road? And I don't mean obviously the individuals, because I agree with you, young people are going to make more of a difference, and I think things will get better, but is it too late for the civilization on the whole?
It's hard to say. I think one thing that bothers me a little bit in recent years is that I think that some people, and I still think they're in a minority, but some people sound like they're almost thinking of, some plan B. And I'm 100% in favor of space exploration and you name it. But, you sometimes hear people saying like, oh, we want to establish colonies on Mars and we're going to be an interstellar species. And those are terrible places. You don't want to live there. If you think the Sahara Desert is bad, think again, right? You really don't want to go to these places. I think we have to be on the same page on this. This is almost certainly the only place we will really be able to call home. And so let's not even start to think about, oh, maybe, we should invest a lot into building, colonies on other planets and so on. I think, and it's difficult to strike the right balance, because I think if you're too pessimistic, people think, oh, well, there's not much we can do about it anyway. It's this ship has sailed, that's it, right? So you have to give them some hope, and there is some hope. I wouldn't want to give people hope if I knew, deep inside that there is no hope. I think there still is some hope. Some of the damage cannot be undone, but even a partially functioning planet is still better than a devastated planet where human survival is impossible. So it's hard to predict the future, but I hope that science and technology, which will play a very important role in this, will allow us to just enjoy our time on this planet a little longer. Of course, ultimately, we are going to go extinct. If there's one thing we've learned from paleontology, that is that no species exists forever. So that's, of course, the other thing.
Unless we can become multiplanetary.
Even then, I think, I think we just should make the most of our time on planet Earth and not think too much about plan B or plan C.
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem arises, like you said a minute ago, is not with it being necessarily plan B, but it's the fact that that plan B almost seems a little bit like plan A for some of the big influential people, and that's the frustrating thing, is that if a lot of these billionaires and maybe trillionaires, secretly, if they were able to put all their resources and power into making Earth a better place and making it more sustainable and actually undoing a lot of the damage, it could be a completely different ballgame overnight, almost, couldn't it? Like, the Earth could regenerate.
I mean, there are a number of problems that have to be overcome, including huge problems of inequality across the world. And, many of the problems that are happening in places where you still find pristine environments directly reflect those inequalities and so on. So that's certainly something that has to be addressed more forcefully. But I also think that, yes, I think we're not putting enough emphasis, financially speaking, on, protecting our planet's treasures, right? And I think some people are trying to start to put some numbers on the value of certain ecosystems and what have you, right? There's maybe one approach that people will understand. And then you really understand what that value is. I think I'll just pick one example. Some of the bravest people I know are patrolling areas where mountain gorillas are living, right? There are some of those rangers are working in one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, right? They risk their lives. They get, many of them were killed. And you kind of look at those people, they're right there at the front line protecting, one of our greatest treasures and one of our closest relatives, right? And yet I know that they often go weeks or months without pay, right? And you kind of go like, how is that even possible? They're protecting a global heritage, right? Something that we all, I hope, cherish and want to protect. How can it be that these people are not getting paid for months on end, right? And that's where I kind of feel like, we're paying taxes on all sorts of things. And, I think we really have to make sure that people obviously adjusted for their means, but people all around the world take a greater part in protecting some of nature's treasures, because it's kind of absurd that people like these heroes have to go without a salary, doing a job that is of huge importance to all of us.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like you said, people have got to look at their own means. So it's not just a case of that. I mean, looking at it on a smaller scale, everybody can make their own difference, right, at home. And it's just when you look at the amount of plastic, that is used, and even me, like, we try really hard to minimize that and to be as good as we can with that. And still, I'm just amazed at the amount that we get through of plastic. Yeah. So I don't even want to think about, the average American family or whatever, or a family from any developed country.
Well, and that's what I was saying about, you have to be careful not to be too pessimistic, because if you look at those maps that show like energy consumption or how much waste is produced per person in different countries. I mean, the United States is always the one that's, dark red or whatever, the one where it's hard, because people look at this and go like, oh man, what am I going to do? I'm still going to go shopping, and almost everything is wrapped in plastic, and it can feel like a real uphill struggle. But we are making some progress, and I think even the fact that we're having these conversations, that many people are having these conversations, and they're aware of these issues and challenges, is a good sign. I just hope that we're going to turn the corner in time before it's too late.
Yeah, that's the big hope. We're close, aren't we? We're like skidding at the edge of the cliff, and it's like the back wheels are off the cliff.
Yeah, I think at this
point,
a
scene in
hanging with
Park.
one hand. We already fell off the cliff, and we're just, like, can we still kind of lift ourselves up?
It actually reminds me of a scene from Jurassic Park, The Lost World, the second one, where there's like the big trucks hanging off the edge of the cliff.
That's right.
Have you
Yeah,
seen
the
it?
trailer. Yeah.
That actually brings me to a nice. Let's do that. A lighter topic. Let's do
Sure.
something lighter to kind of end this out. Jurassic Park. I'm a huge fan. I
Right.
always have been since I was a kid. I've loved dinosaurs like you. In fact, if I could do it again, maybe there's a little chance. I did think about paleontology at one point. Like I loved it. I was passionate about dinosaurs. So, what are your opinions on the films? First of all,
Um, I remember when I first watched Jurassic Park, and I remember it was in a movie theater in Berlin, in
nice.
Germany, and it was great because inside the movie theater they had put all these plants on the walls and everywhere, so it kind of looked like
Wow,
Jurassic Park.
that's so cool.
And so that was really cool. And I remember the experience of seeing, I had read the book, and the experience of kind of seeing these, moving, breathing dinosaurs on the screen was pretty amazing. Now, as a scientist, obviously, there are a number of things that it's quite easy to point to scientific inaccuracies in Jurassic Park movies, right? And I think they come in two categories. I think some of them are, I would say, some of them are not really legitimate in the sense that they're just fun speculation.
Yeah.
And I think they're okay. So some people point, for example, there's a Dilophosaurus that spits venom in the movie and has this neck frill. There's no evidence for either one of those things. But
okay.
I still liked that Michael Crichton, wrote Jurassic Park, came up with this idea, because it's just the kind of thing that, you kind of see in some animals are using venom, and it was just kind of fun speculation. And you kind of go like, okay, we have no evidence for it, but hey, we haven't seen a living Dilophosaurus. But then there are other things where you kind of go like, well, this is just wrong. And so to stick with Dilophosaurus, we know that this was actually a much bigger predator, much more menacing looking, quite different in its anatomy. Obviously, we famously also know that the real Velociraptor was pretty small. These things in the movie look more like something like Utah Raptor, which is a much larger relative. Also, the predatory dinosaurs kind of have the hands that, bunny hands or whatever you want to call it. It looks like they're playing the piano, but really that's anatomically impossible. You'd have to break their wrists to put them in that position. In a Velociraptor, the hands would be more like this, right? Kind of like as if they're just about to clap, which is kind of, in some ways, reminiscent of the avian flight stroke, the bird flight stroke, right? So they would have had very different arms. So that kind of bothers me when I see that. It just kind of looks painful to me as an anatomist. And there are a few other things. We now know that many dinosaurs had feathers or feather-like structures, so it would have been nice to put some of that on some of the dinosaurs. When the original movie came out, we didn't really know all that much about that. So there are some, scientific inaccuracies. But here's the thing. Whenever a new Jurassic Park movie comes out, they'll interview a few paleontologists and ask them, well, what do you think, right? And some of them will just roll their eyes and kind of go like, oh my God, it was, this was wrong and this was wrong. And I don't quite get that, because, these are Hollywood movies. They're not, National Geographic documentary films. And, they're fun movies. And I think I'm not alone in saying that the first one is obviously the best.
Definitely.
But they're actually also, I think, well, again, I'm talking mostly about the first one. The first one, it's a really good movie. I think many people, almost everything what they know about, genetics or amber or dinosaurs is based on that movie, right? and that's pretty remarkable, right? I mean, and it has really helped us understand that dinosaurs were more dynamic animals, this was a key moment in the public's perception of dinosaurs, shifting from big, slow, lumbering giants waiting in a swamp somewhere to these agile, sophisticated animals, highly successful animals. And, you know, there's this idea that still persists in some parts of the world where if you call someone or something a dinosaur, it's kind of outdated and not adapting, what have you. We know, of course, that dinosaurs are one of nature's greatest success stories. And so it's quite the opposite. Dinosaurs were incredibly adaptable and incredibly successful. And I think many people get that nowadays. I think many people, partly because of Jurassic Park, when they think dinosaur, they don't necessarily think, you know, evolutionary dead end. They think, you know, highly efficient, fast-moving predator, right? They think
killing machine. Yeah.
And so I think that was really important. And also, one thing that I think many people are missing is this. The Jurassic Park movies rank amongst the most successful movies in history. Now let that sink in for a moment, because people are not going to see these movies because they want to see a certain actor or actress. They're going to see these movies because they want to see dinosaurs. There are not many scientific fields that generate that sort of level of interest in the public, right?
Yeah.
And so I think Jurassic Park has been fantastic for paleontology. It has generated a lot of interest. Many museums didn't have a dinosaur paleontologist on staff, and the only reason they do now is because of Jurassic Park, you know, because people would come to the museum and would go like, where are the dinosaurs? Or why are your dinosaurs outdated? And, you know, do you have a dinosaur expert in the museum? And many other documentary films kind of followed after Jurassic Park, using CGI dinosaurs in their storytelling. And every time a new movie comes out, there's dinosaur interest is always there. It's a bit like background extinction. It's always there. It always happens. But every now and then you have these big peaks in interest, you know, and everybody wants to see a new dinosaur documentary film or whatever. So I think we paleontologists hugely benefit from this. Jurassic Park brings people into the museums. It generates a lot of interest, and it also inspires, you know, the next generation of paleontologists. Some of my colleagues probably don't want to admit it, but there are a number of paleontologists that really, you know, Jurassic Park was a key moment when it came to their career choices, right? Yeah. I had already made up my mind, so it wasn't for me. I already knew I wanted to be a paleontologist long before Jurassic Park, but for some people, that was a key moment. So in short, I think, you know, it's a good movie series. I'm not going to tell you which ones I didn't particularly like, but, you know, overall, it's a good thing for paleontology. And I think, you know, some of them are also good movies in their own right. I mean, you know, so I think they're good, not just because they have dinosaurs in them, right? So because of, you know, good visuals or, you know, story and so on. So I'm not one of those paleontologists that would just, you know, kind of go on record to say just how bad Jurassic Park is, scientifically speaking, because again, that's kind of beside the point.
I'm assuming it frustrates you a bit when they come up with these new, like, genetically modified, like the Indominus Rex and all this, when there's so many real dinosaurs that you've discovered that have not had any screen time.
That is true. That was a little frustrating, and I think they've kind of backpedaled a little bit to a certain extent. But I think that was, to put it diplomatically, I think that was a dumb decision, because first of all, like, you know, those genetically modified dinosaurs look, they don't look pretty good or interesting. And I think they had a competition where people had to make up a dinosaur, and, you know, at least that's what I heard. And I heard that many of the designs that members of the public came up with actually looked much better than the, you know, Indominus Rex thing, or you know, so that was not, there's so many incredible dinosaurs out there. So that was not the best idea. But as I said, I think they've backpedaled and you know, people want to see dinosaurs. And I think people also like the idea of thinking that the things they're seeing on the screen really lived on planet Earth and maybe in their backyard millions of years ago. And that's just not the case with these made up monsters, because then it's just like any other monster film, it's kind of just
feels like a new franchise could do that, a new film could start up and do the genetically made dinosaurs thing. Jurassic Park should stick to trying to educate as well as entertain, I think.
Yeah, well, also the dinosaurs, the real dinosaurs, are so much more spectacular, I mean, they have so many things that, Hollywood creature designers and so on could not possibly come up with in their wildest dreams, right? So I think there's a lot of material out there, and we keep finding.
What are some of the coolest ones? Sorry to interrupt you there. What are some of the coolest, like most amazing ones for you? Dinosaurs, not films.
Well, obviously they're the classic contenders when you think, biggest dinosaur, right? There's a giant dinosaur skeleton mounted at the Field Museum at the moment. There's a big Titanosaur. So those were animals pushing the boundaries of what's possible in terms of biomechanics. Absolutely humongous animals. It's really difficult to wrap your head around the size of the heart and, other organs. Those are obviously very impressive animals. But then you've got things obviously like Spinosaurus, river monster dinosaur. It's like, if you think Jaws is scary, then think again, because if you're in the water in this river system, this thing is going after you. Even if for some miraculous reason you make it out of the water, it's just going to come out of the water and, eat you on the shore, or on the riverbank. That's a pretty amazing animal. But then there are also, there's some dinosaurs with, there's like a dinosaur that looks a bit like, it has proportions like a hippo, a really heavily built dinosaur from Africa, actually. There are dinosaurs with absolutely spectacular kind of spines. There are some from South America, for example, have giant spines coming out of their neck. And it's not just dinosaurs. There are also flying reptiles. Some of these flying reptiles, pterosaurs, would be about as tall as a giraffe when they're standing on the ground. No, and you kind of think about that. You go like, something as tall as a giraffe and it's flying. That's kind of crazy, right?
That's insane.
And so, you think of all of those things and it's a pretty impressive menagerie, more impressive than anything that Hollywood has ever come up with. So it's certainly an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, for sure. I think in the next Jurassic Park, I'd like to see the Titanosaurus, the giraffe-sized flying guy, and the Spinosaurus done right with what we know now.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, we'll see. I'm not quite sure what to expect from the next one, but there are also some really great documentary films in the pipeline. I know of a couple of projects, including one that I'm involved in. So there's a lot of cool dinosaur content on the horizon.
When's that coming, the one you're involved with?
I don't know. And the reason is that we're still in a pandemic. And so everything has become completely unpredictable in terms of, timelines. So we'll see, hopefully at some point next year. But we don't know. We don't know when normal travel will be possible again. We don't know. I have a number of sites I really want to visit and have to visit very soon. But I just can't, right? Normal travel is still not possible. So we'll see what happens. But, in the grand scheme of things, me not being able to travel to a dig site is not really a big problem. I mean, this pandemic has brought so much suffering and pain onto our world. I think we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Plus, the bones have been waiting 100 million years or so. So I'm sure they can wait a few more months.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. Bones can disintegrate pretty quickly when they're exposed to the elements. And also, sometimes some fossil sites are poached, pillaged. So that's another concern we sometimes have. Yeah. But fingers crossed. I think it's going to be okay. Most of the dig sites I have in mind are very, very remote. So I think we'll be good.
Is the Spinosaurus super remote?
Spinosaurus is not as remote as I would like it to be. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Yeah.
It is in some ways, but not, like some of our dig sites are located in military zones, for example. I mean, in places that are just off limits to almost everyone, right? And so those places are very secure, but other areas are not so much. So it depends. But most of the places are kind of off the beaten path. So
yeah,
I think they'll be safe.
Cool. Look, I've got to get to the big question, the really big question. Tyrannosaurus versus Spinosaurus. Did they have it right? Who wins?
I think the first thing I would say is, some people say, well, would big predatory dinosaurs really act like movie monsters, kind of like King Kong and the T-Rex, right? Kind of, would they get into a... And the answer is sometimes. We know from some predatory dinosaurs, including T-Rex, that they were engaging in very violent, antagonistic encounters. Things like face biting in T-Rex. So in some T-Rex skulls, you see bite marks from another T-Rex. And wow. So, and that sometimes happens. You can look at Komodo dragons and other animals that are, sometimes getting into very violent fights. Obviously, T-Rex and Spinosaurus are separated both in time and space, but we'll leave that aside for a moment.
Yeah, it's a hypothetical.
But they're both very large predators. T-Rex certainly has the stronger bite with these bone-crunching jaws. It obviously has very, very short forelimbs, which really wouldn't be good for anything in that encounter. But it's a massive animal. And so the way it was portrayed in the Jurassic Park movie is not very realistic. And it wouldn't be such a kind of easy one-sided thing for sure. Spinosaurus is quite a bit longer than even the longest T-Rex, from what we can tell based on our knowledge of Spinosaurus. It has very long jaws, but they're very long and narrow. It looks as if Spinosaurus, like other Spinosaurids, had powerful forelimbs with massive claws, much more effective weaponry than a T-Rex forelimb for sure. So, when you have two really big animals, it's just one of those things where I don't know, it's like, it becomes like one of these sandbox conversations between kids. So a lion or a tiger, and you kind of go like, a grizzly bear or a, whatever. It's one of those things where these animals can cause a lot of damage, and it's probably just a question of whoever gets the first good, hit or bite, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. It would probably be pretty ugly. It would probably take a long time, much longer than in Jurassic Park. And it obviously also depends where you are. If you're in some kind of like more aquatic environment, it would probably be very heavily tilted in favor of Spinosaurus. In a terrestrial environment, it would be a better place for T-Rex. So I think it would be an open ending. It would be like the lion or tiger kind of question.
But you've got to be in Spinosaurus's corner. Come on. Put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, the thing is, people think, Spinosaurus has a very special place in my heart. It's an amazing animal. But of course, so is T-Rex. It's a really amazing dinosaur. We know so much more about T-Rex. And so in that sense, Spinosaurus is more interesting at the moment, because there's just so much we're learning about this animal. But they're both really amazing animals. There's so many incredible dinosaurs. We're so fortunate that we even have all the skeletons we have, and that we can enjoy these incredible creatures. So, what I'm going to say is, like, I'm not as emotionally tied to my dinosaur discoveries as people might expect. It's a really special dinosaur. It is in many ways my dinosaur in the sense that I've devoted so much time and so much effort to this creature. But I would still say, lion tiger thing.
Yeah, or two heavyweights in a street fight.
Yeah, pretty much.
First big hit. Okay, yeah. Cool. What about a raptor, a Velociraptor versus a Utah raptor? That's a Utah raptor, hands down.
Oh yeah, that's an easy one. That's like having a really big dog take on a really small one, or the size difference is even greater. I mean, that would not that would be no contest.
And Utahraptors, they work together like we see in the movies with Velociraptors? Is what we believe,
don't know. One thing that's really cool about Velociraptor, there's a really famous fossil. It's known as the fighting dinosaurs, and it actually shows a Protoceratops, a small relative of the Triceratops, the famous horned dinosaur, but much smaller, in locked in combat with a Velociraptor. So the two skeletons are kind of locked in combat, and that's how they died. Maybe they died in a sandstorm, or they're buried by a collapsing sand dune, or who knows. But that's the way they died, and that's a really incredible find, because you kind of see how the Velociraptor is kind of trying to slash, the Protoceratops, and the Protoceratops is holding the one limb of the Velociraptor, and it's kind of this mortal combat. So we know that these sickle-clawed dinosaurs like Velociraptor or Deinonychus or Utahraptor and so on were pretty lethal predators. Were they pack hunters? We don't really know. There was some evidence that had been brought forward for a relative of Velociraptor called Deinonychus. And there was a Yale paleontologist, the late John Ostrom, and he suggested that the accumulation of Deinonychus skeletons associated with the large plant-eating dinosaur, Tenontosaurus, suggested that these were pack hunters. But it's always very tricky to interpret these things, because there's real pack hunting, like something you would see in African hunting dog, or lions or wolves or whatever. And then there is something where you might just have a congregation of predators getting together to bring down prey, like something you might see in Komodo dragons or something. You might have seen this in documentary films, where they're all kind of feasting on a carcass, and it's very gory, and so people have said that the evidence for pack hunting is not as strong as some people believe. There's some work underway now on a new Utahraptor find. It's a big block, which apparently has remains of several Utahraptors, and that might revive the idea of pack hunting. We'll see. So I think it's not unlikely, but the evidence is not as good as we would like it to be at the moment. But who knows? This new Utahraptor discovery, might change things. That's the nice thing about science.
Yeah, 150 million years later, we're still finding everything out. Like we're still waiting for new things to come.
I think that's one of the nice things also about our work on Spinosaurus. It's just a reminder of all the things we don't know about dinosaurs. I think it's always a little. I'm not. How should I put this? Some people love to talk about the quote unquote golden age of dinosaur discoveries we live in. And it's true. We have found so much more dinosaurs in just the last few years. We found out so much more about their behavior than in much of the history of dinosaur research. But I think it creates this false impression in the public that we've kind of figured out dinosaurs, and we kind of know almost everything there is to know about dinosaurs. And the reality, I think, is that we're just scratching the surface. There's so much we don't know about dinosaurs, and so many dinosaurs left to discover. And Spinosaurus is kind of a symbol for that idea. If we have, in all of these years that we've been working on dinosaurs, if we missed a giant 50-foot long predator that turned out to be a river monster, what else have we missed, right?
Yeah.
So I think, if you're a kid considering a career as a paleontologist, and you're worried that all the cool dinosaurs have already been unearthed, do not worry. There's still a lot to find out there. So many buried treasures to find.
Yeah, that's amazing. I tell you what, look, just to ask you one last question, Nizar.
Sure.
If you could give a message to everybody based on kind of your knowledge and your experience and looking at what went wrong with the dinosaurs, kind of what would you say to people?
Well, I think we should sometimes just pause, and some people have done that now in the pandemic, and just consider how incredibly lucky we all are to be alive on this planet. And I think we need to, we're living in these hectic, busy lives. I think we all need to take a moment every now and then to pause, to appreciate the incredible world and planet we live in. And there are different ways to do that, through travel and, learning more about nature. And then, use those moments to also consider how we can try to make this world a better place. And it's not just it's not just about conserving ecosystems. I think people should also think about future generations, your kids, your grandkids, what sort of planet do you want them to live in? And I think if we all do that, or most of us do that, I think we can certainly avoid a self-inflicted extinction event, and enjoy our planet for many generations to come. So I think, every now and then it's important to, forget about your phone, forget about your computer, get off the couch and just go outside and marvel at the incredible world and nature that surrounds us.
Yeah. Solid answer. Really like that. Inspiring. I'm going to do that in a minute. No, thank you. Thank you again for today, man. I really, really appreciate you giving up the time.
Sure.
And talking to me and telling me about all these amazing creatures that used to walk where we live now. I think we left a lot on the table. There's still so much I could ask you about this for hours, all these.
Many... we can, you can always do a follow-up one day. The nice thing is that I hope in a few weeks we'll be back on campus, and campus means access to amazing bones and fossils and what have you. So then it might be even more fun, because we can we can continue the discussion, but I can actually say, like, oh, by the way, here's a giant jaw of a dinosaur eating croc we just uncovered.
Yeah.
Show you things, but yeah, it was fun.
Thank you again. I really, really appreciate it, and have a good one. Yeah, take care.
Sure, you too.
Thanks for listening to that conversation with Nizar Ibrahim. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share it with a friend. If you want to follow Nizar or this podcast, all social media and website links are in the description. Thanks, Nizar, for your time and for sharing some of your epic tales. Be nice, be happy, be cool.